Well, welcome. This is my friend Austin from my locals, who's also in the VPL on a different team than me. Uh, he's gonna talk about the funniest deck I've ever seen played in this tournament.
Yeah, so I'm Austin. This deck came across me whenever I accidentally pulled some cards for it during a pre-release, and everyone kind of badgered me into trying it out. So I was like, ah, whatever, I'll make the deck. This is Sacrifice Glass.
And that's the fancy sacrifice class.
This is the SEC fancy stylized Sacrifice Glass.
I may or may not have been responsible for nagging him into getting it.
Don't gamble, kids.
So, what does sacrifice class do?
So Sacrifice Glass is one of the unique decks in the since D series has came out that actually benefits off of making energy its actual game mechanic. It's focused on forcing your opponent to create a board that you then retire, in essence, to gain energy to be able to use your effects. Taking those effects and creating the most jank Dragonic Overlord knockoff the universe could possibly create.
All right, let's get into the list, I guess.
Yeah. So the ride line is actually the Sacrifice Glass specific ride line. The starter doesn't technically matter, but its name is La 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 Pococo, which how could you not run it after knowing that's its name?
Yeah, mandatory.
Mandatory. It's absolutely mandatory. Um, the grade 1 allows you to ride into the grade 2 for free, and if you do so, then both you and your opponent draw a card. This deck is very focused on asking you to draw as much as possible because our kill turn isn't until turn 6 or 7, unlike most decks where it's turn 4. So we have to be able to get enough pieces to be able to play defensively for the rest of the game. And so you'll see a lot of effects that focus on you drawing. And to balance it, they gave your opponent some draws as well, which is a bit annoying, but it works out in the end for you. The grade 2, whenever it's rated upon by Sacrifice Class, allows you to play a counterblast and search your deck for a Saccharine Bait, which I'll get into in a second. But that's kind of your key order that you're going to need to be playing every single turn once you hit grade 3. And then actual Sacrifice Class gives you a skill at the beginning of the main phase where anytime your opponent's card is retired from either Rear Guard or Guardian Circle, you energy charge 1 and you gain that skill until end of turn. And then at the end of the battle, it attacks. You can Energy Blast 4. Search your hand, deck, or drop for one manifestation of the Great Skyline Grand Dogma. That's our jank Overlord clone. Write it at stand. It gets 15k and -2 drive until end of turn. And if you rode this way, you may have your opponent draw a card. You don't get to choose. So you can't force your opponent to deck out through this strategy. It is just a optional draw that you give to your opponent to help balance out the fact that you are attacking with your Vanguard multiple times throughout the turn.
I've seen that energy charge like produce extremely high amounts of value too.
Yes, I have fully gone. I there are multiple times where I'll have little to no energy. Like I'll after using Sacrifice Glass's skill, I will be at like 2 energy, and by the end of the turn, I've wasted 3 energy by maxing out my energy at 10.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So it's very much this gameplay is going to focus around proper use of your energy, when to use it, where to use it, how often to use it, where your magic numbers and energy lie, besides hitting your magic numbers on your actual swings. So of course you're going to be running 3 more copies of Sacrifice Glass for a total of 4. Since you're a Persona Ride Vanguard, of course this is absolutely necessary. This is what's going to allow you to get a beneficial 10k to your front row. Um, and this is going to allow you to get the extra draw, which again is going to be necessary to survive some more turns than you'd be used to. Then, of course, we run 4 copies of Manifestation of the Great Skyline Grand Dogma. This is the big lady. We have Jarman, and we
The
have Big
giant woman,
Lady.
if you will.
Yes, I would love to see you turn into a giant woman. A giant woman.
I will never get tired of that joke.
What manifestation of the Great Skyline Grand Dogma does, which I'm just going to refer as Big Lady through the rest of this to make my life easier because it's a mouthful of a name. After it attacks, you choose one of your opponent's rear guards and retire it. Then if you have one or more copies of her in the bind zone, you get to retire again. And if you have two or more copies in the bind zone, you get to restand her and swing again with no downside to your drives. However, you will have -2 drives if you've ridden from Sacrifice class that turn. So, when you're superior riding, you still won't get any drives on Grand Dogma, but eventually you'll be able to stay on Grand Dogma and can swing for 4 drive checks in a single turn. However, at the end of your turn, if your bind zone does not have 2 or more copies of her in the bind zone, you must force her into the bind zone, choose a sacrifice class from your soul, and rewrite it at the end of turn. You also cannot accelerate this deck because she has an additional skill that says whenever it would be put into the bind zone by the ability of a card not named Manifestation of the Great Skyline Grand Dogma, she forcibly retires herself.
That's really funny that they were worried about that.
This deck, bushiroad would put so many restrictions on this deck because they were so worried it was going to be good. But it ends up being very bad, but also very funny at the exact same time.
So is there a turn there where you get 3 vanguard swings?
There is. So turn 5, you will swing with Sacrifice Glass. So turn 3, you swing Sac Glass, get your first Grand Dogma, bind it. Turn 4, you do the same thing. Turn 5, you swing with Sac Glass, go into Grand Dogma. Swing, since you have 2 or more, restand, and swing again. So turn 5, you get 3 Vanguard swings.
Alright.
Next up is going to be the order that was mentioned earlier, Saccharine Bait. We run 3 copies in this deck list. While it is semi-mandatory to run this order and play it every single turn outside of Grade 3, we do have a card that I'll show later that helps us kind of with recursion of being able to use a single copy multiple times. But what this does is this is a counter. You pay this with Counterblast 1, and then it changes its effect based on the Vanguard you're currently on. This effect can be a bit complicated, and I have had opponents that even after explaining it will misunderstand the card, so be very careful whenever explaining this card to your opponent. If you are on Sacrifice Glass, the skill becomes your opponent gets a red text skill until the end of your turn. The red text skill reads that all of your rear guards and cards in your drop lose all their continuous and auto abilities. They cannot gain them, and they cannot be moved from rear guard to guardian circle, essentially saying they can't intercept. Your opponent then chooses
the hostage order.
This does the order give the red text to the unit, or is it a skill of the order itself?
I think the order itself moves the unit.
If it's the order, no, if it moves it, then it can, because it's the rulings. The wording specifically states and cannot be moved from rear guard to guardian circle.
Okay.
So this potentially can shut down hostage builds as well. After giving your opponent that red text skill, they then choose 3 unit cards from their drop and call them to open rear guard circles. Then, for every 3 rear guards on the board in total, combining yours and your opponent's, you draw a card for every 3 that are on the board. So if both you and your opponent have a full board of rear guards, that's 10 in total, you get to draw 3 cards off this order.
That's insane that it just draws you 3 cards.
It just draws you 3 cards, and this is what allows you to kind of force your opponent to create a board that'll allow you to retire it with Sacrifice Glass and its support. So that way your opponent can't.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're good. I was just gonna say that this kind of keeps your opponent from being like, oh, if I never build a board, then I just turn my opponent's deck off. This sort of kind of prevents that from happening.
Sure. This also gets around resistance stuff, right?
Yes, because it's a skill that's given to your opponent. It doesn't target any unit in particular.
So we can get rid of blast tokens, right?
You can get rid of blast tokens with this because it automatically removes the skill without checking what unit it's targeting. So it removes its ability to not be targeted and then can be retired by Sacrifice Glass later on in the same turn. So this deck actually fully shuts down Estashian that way.
Which is hilarious.
Also, with the new Buddy Fight collab set coming out, they have cards that say that they cannot be moved or removed. This gets around that as well. So whenever Buddy Fight comes out, if your locals is playing a lot of that, you could theoretically counterpick by playing this goofy deck.
It's like every time I learn details about Sacrifice Glass, it just gets funnier because it just has all these really weird effects that on paper
Speaking
are
of
really strong.
no kidding. And then they nerfed him into the ground because they were so scared of this deck. Whenever your Vanguard is Manifestation of the Great Skyline Grand Dogma, however, the effect entirely changes. You get none of what was mentioned before, and instead, the skill of the order becomes, if your Vanguard was not placed during the right phase this turn, you get Persona Ride for free. You then choose any number of cards from your drop other than Heal or Overtrigger, each with different grades, from your drop and return them to the deck and shuffle it. Putting it simplistically, you choose a 0, 1, 2, and 3 that are not heal or OT, and you can throw them back in the deck, however many of them you wish.
That's probably specifically for premium, right? Because of the grade 3 heals.
Yeah, absolutely. And also because they just don't want you to be able to force kind of livability in this deck, even though this deck's kind of required to have livability to get to its kill turn. The next card to talk about, we run 4 copies of the Grade 2 Sacrifice Class support, Eternal Musician, Musi. If Sacrifice Class is the bread of the deck, Musi is the butter. What this card does is this allows you to retire your opponent's rear guards if it's on the front row. When your Grade 3 or greater Sacrifice Class attacks, while this is on a front row rear guard circle, you choose an opponent's rear guard and retire it. So, if you have one in each front row rearguard circle whenever Sac Class swings, you get to retire 2 units on board for free, in turn energy charging you 2 and giving you more energy to play around with to get to that EB4 for its skill.
Yeah.
Additionally, though,
sorry.
It also becomes butter for Grand Dogma in the fact that whenever Grand Dogma swings, Musi gets 10k until the end of turn. And that is not a once per turn skill, so whenever Grand Dogma gets to swing twice in a turn, Musi here will be getting 20k and will be a 30k beat stick.
So the pressure's pretty high once you get Grand Dogma going, huh?
Yes, once you're able to get to that, specifically that 2 in bind for Grand Dogma, your pressure becomes immediately very, very high. The next card will be what we just picked up recently with the new set. It is the Persona Ride Cyclers, or Pride Cyclers, you'll hear them called. Whenever it's placed on rearguard circle from hand other than by a unit's card ability or discarded from hand while riding from the right deck, you choose a card with Persona Ride from your right deck, reveal it. If you do so, or if you have a Vanguard with Persona Ride, you can Soul Blast 1 and put a Persona Shield ticket into your hand. I do not have any Persona Shield tickets on me, unfortunately, but they are a Blitz Order with a skill that after you play them, you can play an additional Blitz Order that turn, as well as being a 10k shield. So it just allows you some more defensive versatility.
Seems really solid that once they get to turn 6 or 7.
Exactly. As well, if you need it to be a attacker, it does get 5k whenever it swings on a grade 3 or greater. So it's also a 15k beat stick. So if your opponent forcibly retires your Muses, or you happen to not be able to find Muses, Ravos becomes a good backup here. Next, we'll be talking about Miasmic Beast Medulla, another Sacrifice class support that we run a full playset of. If Sacrifice is the bread and Musi is the butter, Miasmic Beast Medulla is the garlic that you infuse into the butter to give it that extra good spice. Its skill is essentially Avarice Rester if you're familiar with other Darkseid cards, but it's specific for Sacrifice class. Once per turn, you can Soul Blast 1 and discard a card from your hand, choose a Saccharine Bait from your drop, and it gets the skill that this card can be played from drop, and when it would be played and put into drop, put it on the bottom of your deck and set it till end of turn. Now the reason we run this instead of Avarice Wrestler, besides the fact that this card is absolutely dirt cheap compared to Avarice due to decks like Leal Odium, is the secondary skill. At the end of the turn, you Energy Blast 5 and get an additional draw.
So you get to turn a
So,
lot of energy into a lot of cards.
exactly. If you end your turn with max out energy and you have 2 Medollas on the board, you can fully Energy Blast 10 and draw 2, and still have plenty of energy to be able to pop Sack Blast next turn with zero issue at all because of how much energy you gain while playing this deck.
It's just absurd.
I have had turns where popping 2 Medollas, using Saccharine Bait, and also playing a couple of other grade 1s, which we're about to get into, that also draw cards. I have had turns going into my opponent's turn where I've had a 15 or 16 card hand.
I've witnessed this.
One of those cards that we're going to talk about is the oh-so-famous order that came out with the Skyride manga, Opener of Heart Philia, which we do play a full playset of. If you're planning to build this deck, this is where a majority of your money is going to go. However, I do highly recommend it. I have some more budget options that I can talk about later. But for this deck specifically, I do run a full playset because whenever it boosts, if your opponent has one or less rearguard or you've played an order this turn, it gets 5k until end of battle, and at the end of the battle, you can choose to put it into your soul and draw a card. The 3 key pieces of this card are the 3 things that Sack Blast does best. Give your opponent 1 or less rear, play an order every turn, and require drawing cards.
Yeah.
It's like if this card wasn't made to be generic, I wouldn't be shocked if they're like, here's some Sack Blast promo that you need to make the deck functional. Moving on to our next card, this card is actually going to be shifted out once we hit set 9, but we do run 3 Illusory Lantern Demonic Lady Forkalore. Because of the skill that it gives you an extra energy, which you can use to play around with if you're one off from hitting magic numbers. And then if you have Energy Blaster 3 or more, after it boosts, you can retire it to draw a card. Since Sack Blast's skill meets that requirement and is always your first swing of the turn, Forkalore will always be online, allowing you to get that additional retire and draw.
Yeah, it just seems really solid.
Is really solid. In set 9, though, we are going to be getting a new support card, which I have proxied here for the sake of this. This is... I have the name of it pulled up here so that I don't screw this up. Shrewd Demonic Lordling Malphas. It is a double rare that we'll be getting in set 9 at the end of August. So if you see this after August, go for this instead of Forkalore. It will be significantly cheaper because it's Sack Blast support. And it has a much better skill. Essentially what it does is if it's in the back row center, whenever your grade 3 or greater vanguard with Grand Dogma is placed during your battle phase or stands during your battle phase, Soul Blast 1, retire it, and your entire front row gets an additional 5k until end of turn. It's also a defensive card. Whenever it's put on the Guardian Circle, if you have a grade 3 or greater vanguard with Sack Blast in its name, discard 1 or more cards from your hand up to 3 maximum, and it gets 10k shield until end of battle for each card discarded for this cost. So, you could discard 3 other grade 1s, which would only be 15k shield, and turn this singular card into a 35k shield by itself.
You can also... Can you ditch Grand Dogmas, too, that you ended up drawing by accident?
That is exactly it, and since you can search your drop for Grand Dogmas, you can freely drop extra grade 3s for this skill, so you can turn essentially what can be brick hands, or what we call fake hands, or in my case, Bastion hands, because I started playing this game on Bastion, where you have a significant amount of grade 3s that just do nothing in your hand. You can now ditch them to turn this into a massive, massive shield blocker.
Yeah, that seems really good in a deck that's playing, like, 7 grade 3s.
Yes, yeah. And orders as well. Like, if you find yourself flooded on Saccharine Baits, you can also throw those into drop and then play them from drop with Medolla, so you can still use them, while also turning them into shield value at the same time.
Yeah, this deck's surprisingly defensive.
It is turning surprisingly defensive. So yeah, if you run Forklores, you can. They can be expensive. They're still running about $11 a piece at the moment. So if you want to play this deck today and you have cash to drop, then might as well go ahead and snag 3 or 4 of these. But if you are willing to give yourself a little bit of patience, or if you're seeing this after Set 9 is already released, absolutely pick up Malphas instead. It is 100% a better card and will fit the deck much better. giving you a lot more tools to play around with than just getting one additional draw. The next card we're talking about is the Regallus piece. We run Protection Twincast. Again, defensive power, defensive capability. This can be used twice, which is why we pick it up absolutely over the other Blitz orders. We don't want to run a normal order Regallus piece because we do want to be playing Sacred Bait every single turn once we hit 3, so there is no space in your turn to be able to play a Regallus piece that wouldn't put you at a detriment instead of just playing Sacred Bait. So we go with a Blitz order here, and Protection Twincast is the best because it is a 2-for-1 special when it comes to protecting you and giving you some extra shield value. If you don't have Protection Twincast, Evergreen Transfer is absolutely another option I recommend. It causes an additional Soul Blast, which you are pumping your soul full with things like Philia. So you are able to pay this pretty easily. But if you don't have either of these, Transfer can actually be more expensive, so I would always go with Twincast. The other option is, of course, Union the Sky, which I don't recommend unless you picked up the Vergilia starter deck that includes this card and don't want to drop the $25 for Twincast. Because this card, unless you want to pay the Counterblast, is going to be using energy, which, while we've talked about how energy fulfilled you can be in this deck is kind of fine-tuned on how it uses that energy, and just popping 3 for a simple Blitz order is not going to be the most effective, which is why we use the Pride Cyclers as well over the potential of Energy Cyclers and why that was not mentioned earlier. But this is good because it can be a 15k or even 25k shield if you're willing to pay the Counterblast, which the deck can function without that additional Counterblast because the only Counterblast in this deck is going to be Sacred Bait. But as you want to make sure that you have that CB open, because if you end up using your last CB and your opponent damage denies you, there's no counter charge in this deck. They didn't make any counter charge available to Sacred Bait or Sacrifice Glass that can really slot in well. So if your opponent denies you and you end up using your last CB for Union the Sky, you're essentially SOL at that point, and you might as well scoop and say GG next.
Yeah, your only options would be like Radiance Caliburn or the Rideline Returner, right?
Yeah, and Radiance Caliburn again falls into the same issue of we'd rather be playing Sacred Bait.
Right.
And the Rideline Returner is just the deck is... You can run the Rideline Returner if you want. You absolutely can. Knock one of these playsets down to a 3 of and run the Rideline Returner if you wish. I don't, just because the deck doesn't typically need the Counterblast if you actually remember to keep Counterblast open. Plus, most people don't know what Sacrifice Glass does, so they will more realistically let you have the CB to let you play around with.
Right. I don't think I've ever seen you get choked on CB playing this deck.
No, it's very much because this deck I like to take damage early, specifically so that they can't damage deny me later once they find out what Sacred Bait does. And by that point, I have enough CB that I can play around with that I'm not worried at all. The OT that we run for this deck is going to be the Nation OT. Dark States OT, whenever it's revealed as an offensive trigger, you get the red text skill that your Vanguard gets 10k and a crit for the rest of the game. If you hit this early, like most Dark States deck, this is incredible, but because we have a deck that Vanguard swings 2 to 3 times in a turn, being able to swing with an additional crit every single time is very devastating very quickly.
Yeah, it seems
that turn
like
5...
I was about to say the turn 5 with this seems like really hard to beat.
Yeah, there are games where I've hit this on turn 2 or 3, and the second that I mentioned that Grand Dogma restands, I've had opponents scoop before, just because they realize what they're about to get into and don't want to deal with it. The other OTs, there isn't really another good option. Blue OT does give you the crit, but it's only a one-time thing. You can get a card from your drop, but the only card that you would want to grab out of your drop is either Grand Dogma or Sacred Bait, and you can use both of those from the drop super easily with Sacrifice Glass and Medulla. red OT to resend a rear guard. Your rear guards aren't the problem children here. It's going to be those vanguard swings. Purple OT, being able to grab something from damage can be super nice. But as long as you counterblast properly, like if you hit a Grand Dogma or a Sacred Bait, making sure to counterblast those early on so they can then heal them out later. You typically won't run into an issue where you need something that's in your damage that you can't get out. And yellow OT, retiring your opponent's guard, you're attacking so much anyway that knocking out one attack's worth of guard isn't going to do much for you, and you already draw so much in this deck anyway that you don't need to be drawing for open rear guard circles at that point.
You're also you might deck yourself out if you play yellow OT, right?
Yep, this deck, because it draws so much, it does run into an issue of potentially decking out. And nearly decking out and putting yourself on that brink of deck out is actually part of this deck's strategy that I'll get into in a minute. As for triggers, of course, we run 4 regular crits and 4 effect crits. The classic 8 crit lineup. These go into Soul, which you can use to Soul Blast out for things like Medulla, for your Pride Cyclers, etc. And crits are just good and delicious and are part of your win con because you want to be dealing big damage at big moments. Of course, for heals, I run the normal heals. This kind of comes up to preference for you as a player. If your locals or the tournament you're going into, is going to have a lot of decks that would benefit from you having one of the counter heals, it's absolutely worth it to play. But if you don't know what you're going against, or if your locals has a wide spread, absolutely normal heals are the way to go. Just the classic 15k shield is more than plenty to cover the heal specifically.
Right.
We run 3 of the effect fronts, of course, as the kind of discussion earlier. You don't want to be running draws because you can deck yourself out. Plus, this is a 20k shield in comparison to the effect draws 10k shield, and we need that defensive power to make it through turns, so this is just absolutely the correct option. Do not run draws. You will deck yourself out every single game. And then, of course, 4 PGs. With an Elementario to boot. Yep.
Yeah.
3 of the better PGs that allow you to discard for free, or allow you to play for free if you have 1 or less in hand. And then the Sanctitude. We run the triple drive Sanctitude. Again, comes up to you as a player. If your locals or the tournament you're going into is going to be running a lot of Stride decks, you can absolutely switch this out for the Elementario that gets the free effect if your opponent has an additional crest. But there are more decks in general that can get triple drive than there are that can get crest. So, because my locals can be very wild with what decks are being played, the triple drive is absolutely the correct choice for Elementaria.
Yeah, I agree. Generically, it's the best one.
Yeah. In terms of price for this deck can be astronomically cheap if you play Dark States already. Like if you have the what I like to call the Dark States good stuff. So if you already have Twin Cast, if you have your Philias, if you have your Pride Cyclers, and if you want to run them, if you have your Forkalors, as well as like your triggers and PGs and all that other classic good stuff.
Stuff you should have if you're a Dark States fan.
Yes, if you already are playing Dark States, you should absolutely already have all this already. If not, it's definitely worth the investment. But if you already have this, all of the Sacrifice Glass stuff is astronomically cheap, and I actually pulled the prices this morning, the day that we're filming this. And if you were to buy all of the Sacrifice Glass stuff just on its own, you will be paying more in shipping and taxes than this deck is going to cost you. For what I just showed you, you're going to be paying $3.31 in market value for this deck.
That's insane. I think that makes it easily
now,
the cheapest deck in Standard, right?
Absolutely. The Dark States good stuff does make it a tiny bit pricier. 4 colors coming in, of course, at about $10 a piece, 10 11 a piece. Philia's coming in at 11 apiece. Ravos coming in at about 3 to 4 apiece. And Twin Cast coming in at 25. If you build this deck specifically as I've showed you, this deck's going to cost you about $120 in market value.
That's still in the lower end for a lot of stuff. And
Absolutely.
the expensive stuff is all staples that you kind of need already.
Yeah, you can absolutely use this stuff in other decks if you play anything else from Dark States, and some of it is kind of key pieces like the Philias, the Pride Cyclers, Twin Cast can be used in any deck, even if you're not a Dark States player. If you want to build this deck and the $30 sounds super appealing and the $120 sounds less appealing, there are some budget options that you can do. Of course, like I said, if you have either the other two Blitz orders and you want to run them instead, you can. It is less optimal, but they are absolutely options that you can run without absolutely breaking your gameplay. If you don't want to pay for Philias, the card I was using before was Clerical Star Demonic Lady Bifrons. This card is a Alamagister support that has a generic first ability that allows you to pay Counterblast, look at the top 3 cards, put 1 into hand, 1 into soul, and 1 into drop. Philia is absolutely better, but if you don't want to pay for Philia, this is absolutely a great option. If you don't have these, though, these can be expensive because they are a triple rare card. I saw them running for, I think, 9 to 10 a piece. So they're almost as expensive as Philias at that point. So if you don't have either, just get the Philia. But if you have these, it's a good budget option. Just be careful of your Counterblast, because it is using that up where you need to be using it for
If you're a Jejula player, you probably have a playset of this lying around from when we used to play.
Absolutely. If you're a Jejula or Alamagister player, you absolutely have a playset of this lying around. If you don't want to pay for the Pride Cyclers and you are coming back to the game after getting out just before DZ sets started coming out, you might have a playset of the original Ride Cyclers. Those are also an option. This is the card I was running before I got my own playset of Pride Cyclers. But this card is significantly more expensive than Ravos, so if you don't have this already, it is no longer a budget option. The budget option will be Ravos at that point. If you feel like you don't have enough attackers, or if you need some more attackers because you don't have the Ravos and decide to run no Ride Cyclers of any kind, another option is Casualty Dragon, Crucial Dragon. This is a grade 3 card. It has the skill where if your opponent drive checks or damage checks a trigger, it gets 10k power and 10k shield, so it does have that little bit of defensive capabilities there. As well, if it swings unboosted but has a booster behind it, you can put that booster into Soul and trigger one of the following effects. You can either choose one of your opponent's regards and retire it, boosting up your sack losses skill, as well as giving it 5k, or you can remove an over trigger from drop, and your opponent cannot call grade 1s or greater from hand to Guardian Circle, so you can give it a little bit of a Sentinel restrict that way as well. It's a great backup attacker option. Musi is absolutely the best just because it swings for such high numbers naturally. And I much prefer Ravos, but if you don't want to run any Ride Cyclers and you happen to have a couple of these lying around, these are great to splash in the deck until you're able to get the stuff you need.
You could also,
and the one,
if you have them, like one of the Dual Nation cards wouldn't be that bad either, right?
Yeah, the Dual Nation cards are great. The issue with them, unfortunately, is they are really expensive.
Right.
The Dark States Dragon Empire one, because of how often it gets splashed into other things, runs upwards of $25 a copy. And the Dark States, I believe it's Dark States Brandgate Dual Nation, can also work, but again, it runs about 15 to 20, so those are both pretty expensive. But if you happen to have them and you feel comfortable splashing them in, they absolutely can work for you.
Yeah, basically, whatever good generic staples you have can fill this spot.
Yes, absolutely. If your locals or the tournament you're going to, say, Shoji Doji gets a wave of support that make it the best deck in format once again, Shoji Doji 100% kills this deck. This deck is DOA whenever Shoji Doji comes across it, because it returns your bind zone to your deck, so you will never be able to reach that 2 Grand Dogma and bind you need to make all your skills pop off. In return, Bushi actually gave us some counter support. This is Preacher of the Forbidden Arts, Pelardo. You counterblast 1, retire an opponent's rear guard, and you essentially choose all of your Grand Dogmas in the bind zone, and they cannot be removed from bind zone for the rest until the end of your opponent's turn. And then if it has Grand Dogma in the bind, it gets 5k power and 5k shield. So, if your locals has a lot of Shoji Doji, you can absolutely splash this in. If your locals doesn't run Shoji Doji, or you're going to a more prominent tournament where you won't see Shoji Doji, this is a not very good choice. But it does help protect us from a deck that would make us dead on arrival if we didn't have it.
It's technically playable.
Technically playable. So that's the deck list.
Yeah, let's see
And
what
now
this
go
deck
ahead.
looks like for like a typical attack pattern.
Yeah, let's absolutely set that up. We'll say by the time you turn to grade 3, you probably will have taken 3 damage, and you probably have about 4 to 5 cards in your hand, including that Saccharine Bait.
Reasonable assumptions.
Your turn order is going to look like this. You're going to make sure that your board plus your opponent's board is going to equal 9 rear guards, to call out as much of this board as you can to reach 9, but only reach 9 rear guard. If you know you can give your opponent a full board, leave yourself at 4 rear guards in case you end up finding a card that'll fit better into that 5th rear guard slot.
Sure.
Then the first thing you're going to do is absolutely you're going to play that Saccharine Bait from your hand. Pay the counterblast cost for it. There are nothing important in my damage zone, but let's say there was a Grand Dogma in my damage zone instead of that Sacrifice Glass. This is going to be the card that you want to remove from your damage zone first, because you want it in the drop as soon as possible. Play your Saccharine Bait, pay that cost, force your opponent to lose all of their rearguard skills and force them to lose any form of rearguard to Guardian Circle moving, force them to call a board, allow yourself to draw 3 cards, keep the 7 from our hand to show how many cards this deck can draw in a single turn, and move this to your drop zone, of course. Then, of course, fill that last rearguard slot or multiple rearguard slots if you need to. If you can't get up to 9, of course, make your board that can fill up to this total of 6 rearguards. Like if your opponent has no rears on board, there is no reason for you to play a full board. Just play 3 rearguards, force them to call 3, hit that 6, and be able to draw 2. Work in packs of 3. Call that last rearguard. Give you the skill from your vanguard to allow you to get that juicy energy charge. And then your first swing is always going to be your vanguard swing, and you want to boost here. Because Grand Dogma is going to get power on its own, if you just swing Sac Glass by itself, it's a 13k. Your opponent can guard with a single trigger for a 2 to pass, and that feels bad. So in turn, we're going to boost on the Sacrifice Glass swing. Because we played Order, Philia, of course, is going to activate, giving it that 5k power, making this a 26k swing. Say your opponent no guards it for the funny. You get a heal, immediately you get value. You get that Grand Dogma back in your drop zone. You now have utility to be able to play this from drop. Give power to either Musi, and you hit a critical trigger. If your opponent no guards, obviously you can give the crit to your Vanguard. If not, you can give it to either of your Musis as well. There's now 5 cards you've gained that turn. As well, both Musis have triggered, which have retired 2 rear guards, which gives you 2 more energy.
Yeah, we're already close to capping on energy.
We're already close to capping. We're at 8 out of 10 at the moment. We do spend 4 going down to 4 to go ahead and look for our Grand Dogma. When searching for Grand Dogma, deck comes first. We want to deck thin as much as physically possible. If you can't find any in your deck, grab them from drop. The last thing you want to do is reveal that you had Grand Dogmas in hand and give your opponent extra information. If you need to, use them to guard. Use them as PG fodder. Put them in the drop zone, then call them from drop. The less information you can give your opponent, the better. So we're going to grab from deck here. And we'll grab that Grand Dogma. holds itself at stand. Gets 15k, that -2 drive, so it won't be swinging for any drive checks here. And of course, your opponent may draw a card. The word may has become one of my least favorite in my vocabulary.
I will say the
Because
artwork for Sack Blast support is phenomenal.
it is incredible. I mean, just like these cards alone. Let me get that glare out of there.
Yeah, they look great, and then the Sack Blast himself also looks really good.
Yes. Good old Jar Man. So you get your Grand Dogma out here, your opponent chooses to draw the card if they wish, then you can activate Philia, put that into Soul, get yourself an additional card draw for that turn. We're up to 6 cards drawn now. Next you're going to swing with Vanguard again, because remember that Musi gets effects whenever either of your Vanguards swing. So you want to swing here to give your Musis additional power, get them puffed up. If you happen to have like a Ravos here instead of a Musi, you can choose to swing with that first if it'll be smaller than your Vanguard. Always remember to swing with your smallest column first in case your opponent hits defensives. But if you have double Musi, you always want to swing Vanguard first in this scenario. Besides, it'll in turn become most likely your smallest column anyway. Your Grand Dogma will swing for 28k with no drives. At the end of the battle, it'll retire something again. Boom, that's another energy. We will swing with Musi here for another. This will be 38 because we hit a trigger. It'll normally hit for 28, so it'll already hit the same numbers as your Vanguard naturally. So this will be 38 here, and then 38 here again with that crit if your opponent PG'd the original sacrifice class. We'll say for the purposes of this, you push your opponent super hard with that crit, they want to guard with a lot of stuff. They end up capping out your energy, just for the fun of this demonstration.
They're looking at 2-card guard on all these attacks, at least.
Yep. Which is, if they 2-card guard every single one of these swings here, that'll take you from 5 to 11 technically, which means you'll hit that cap out at 10. At the end of the turn, this Grand Dogma goes into your bind zone. Sacrifice class rewrites himself from your soul. And then you can activate both Medalas here, go back down to 0 energy, and draw 2 cards. In that turn alone, on your first grade 3 swing, you have drawn 8 cards for your hand. In addition to what you already had in your hand already whenever you started your turn.
Just casually sitting on a 12-card hand on turn 3.
On the end of turn 3, you're sitting on a 12-card hand, on average.
Yeah, so as long as you don't get grade 3 flooded or order flooded, this seems like it's really hard to kill.
Yes. And like, to be fair, I didn't shuffle the deck super hard, but still, like, looking at my hand from that turn, I ended up with a PG, I ended up with my twin cast, I ended up with 6 triggers, including the OT, and then a couple of 5k guards.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
The goal here eventually is whenever, if you can, again, it's hard for this deck to get to its kill turn because it's so far past other decks' kill turns. But if you can, let's set up a optimal board state for your Grand Dogma turn. Actually, let's show off. We're going to show off 2 endgames here, now that I think about it. There is... Oop. Sorry, my phone just went off for no reason. There are 2 endgames here. One is where you accelerate into your Overlord turn on turn 5 instead of turn 6. And one is where you are going to guarantee yourself a crit, a minimum of 1 crit on your Overlord swing turn. So the turn 5 play requires you to have a Grand Dogma in hand. If you have the Grand Dogma in hand already, Then by the end of turn 4, after you've put your second Grand Dogma in the bind zone, technically Grand Dogma is already active to go. So you can freely write it from your hand and have your full 4 drive check turn with a restand and the double boost to Musi without having to wait an additional turn to reach your kill potential. If you don't think you'll survive to turn 6, or if you think your opponent has enough defensive capabilities to live through next turn, but maybe not this turn, maybe they push super hard this turn, and you want to punish, this is absolutely a play you can do. Especially people who know this deck will expect the turn 6 kill, so if you accelerate by turn 5, this could be a fun little way to kind of catch your opponent off guard and attempt to kill them a turn early.
Yeah, that 4 drive checks could probably also maybe plus you just enough cards to live through one more turn yourself.
Exactly. Let's say we're going for the turn 6 kill here. Let's say this Grand Dogma's in drop. Say you have 6 cards in deck. Yes. And so obviously on turn 5, you again use your sacrifice glass to get into your Grand Dogma. We'll say the rest of these cards are in the drop for the sake of this. So you're on Grand Dogma at the beginning of your turn here, which means that Saccharine Bait is going to change the way it works. You also are no longer gaining as much energy at this point because you no longer get the main phase skill from Sacrifice Glass. Be aware. By this point, you shouldn't need to draw. At this point, energy is kind of a moot point, but just be aware that you are not gaining that energy anymore, and you shouldn't be using it anyway. Let's say you have 8 energy after you energy charge 3 for the turn. You have 6 cards left in deck. You want to get to 6 or less. 6 is the absolute maximum you want to be at whenever you're trying to do this. Because essentially what you're trying to do is before using Saccharine Bait, you want to be left with only 3 cards left in your deck. So you begin your turn, you draw a card for turn. You are then going to Energy Blast 7, draw another card. You are then going to specifically use Medulla to activate Saccharine Bait here. You do not want to play Saccharine Bait from your hand in this scenario. Soul Blast 1. Discard whatever you wish from your hand, even if it may be the Saccharine Bait that you were going to play that turn. I don't have one in my hand, we'll just discard this Ravos here to make it nice and easy. Choose that Saccharine Bait from your drop, give it the ability to be played from drop, and return to deck after you use it. That's the key piece that we're going to use for this combo here. You're going to pay your Counterblast. Of course, we would definitely be at 5 damage by this point. Probably only have a few CB left, if any. You want to have at least 1 CB, otherwise scoop. Go ahead and pay your Counterblast for Saccharine Bait. You gave the Manifestation of Great Skyline Grand Dogma skill. Since you did not place a Vanguard yet this turn, you activate Persona Ride, an additional 10k to the front row, and draw a card. You're at that magic 3 here. Whatever you have to do to get to that magic 3, that's what you gotta do. Then you're going to choose, of course, 1 of each grade from your drop and return them to the deck, but it says up to. So what you're going to do here is play enough cards in your deck, including your crit as your grade 0 choice, however many you need, to get your deck up to 4. You then obviously shuffle your deck, as funny as it is to shuffle 4 cards for your deck, while your opponent cut if they wish, and then Medulla places this card on the bottom of your deck. What this allows you to do is you now know the 5th card in your deck. You know it's going to be that Saccharine Bait. You are going to get 4 drive checks this turn, which are going to be the 4 cards you don't know. Or in this case, because you know what's in your drop, in your damage, and in your hand, and in your soul, you should know exactly what these 4 cards are. Which means you know exactly what you're going to hit on your Grand Dogma drive checks. swing with Grand Dogma, reveal that crit you placed, along with whatever else is in there, restand her, swing again, reveal whatever triggers are left in your deck. In this case, if you got lucky, there's an additional crit and front in there.
So even if they guard our vanguard, they're probably dying to one of the rear guards here.
Yep, because both of these Muses, if they guarded the vanguard both times, both of these Muses are swinging for a crit with 10k from the front, 10k each from the crit, 10k from the Persona Ride, and 20k from Grand Dogma swinging twice. Which means that these are going to be swinging for a total of 68 each column with an additional crit.
Yeah, that seems pretty difficult to survive this late in the game. They've probably been perfect guarding your vanguard too.
And if they somehow survive this turn, you only have one card left in deck anyway, so it does not matter. You will either deck out or die from damage. But that is your most likely way to win using that turn 6 kill, is optimizing your deck so you know exactly what's left, guaranteeing there is a minimum of one crit in there, and just going into town.
Likewise, if your opponent's really close to deck out, you could put the full 0, 1, 2, 3 back, right?
You could. If you want to play the long game, you can absolutely do that. You can just throw 4 cards back, play kind of defensively, hope to hit the triggers or more defensive power, and then just help your opponent decks out before you do. Because you can put 4 cards back each turn, you're only drawing 1, so you technically can never deck out with this deck if you play it right. Because you will be playing those saccharine baits from your hand, putting them into drop, putting them back into deck from Medulla, getting them out, playing them from hand, putting them in drop, playing them from drop with Medulla. You have an infinitely recurring deck in that way if you want to play the defensive deck out strategy.
Yeah, it seems like that might actually be viable against decks like maybe like Leal Odium.
Yeah, decks that are just going to constantly have a lot of defensive power. It's just worth it to just kind of hold your own and kind of outplay their long game there.
Yeah, this I've seen this deck in action at locals quite a few times now. It weirdly seems like it's only 1 or 2 cards away from actually being good.
Yes, I absolutely agree.
Acceleration for the Grand Dogmas.
Yep. This gave us Grand Dogma acceleration. If they eroded Sacrifice Glass to force a draw, so you could also kind of force that alternate deck out play if you wish. Even I think just when we hit set 9 and we eventually get Melfest, I feel like that's going to be a huge boon to this deck. More defensive power, more offensive power, and absolutely what you're going to be putting in your Vanguard booster slot.
Yeah, it's currently it's a bit of a meme deck, but it does seem like there's some potential for this to at least be maybe not tier 1, but like a reasonable deck to play at locals and try to win with.
Yeah, and it runs up against some funny matchup where it just kind of wins, because there are decks that just require them to have either a board that they don't have a way to replenish, or to have specific units on board. Again, Estachian, the new Buddy Fight collab. I played against someone in locals who was running the Stoicheia Koro Koro deck, the BBB deck. And that requires you to have units on board, and there's no way to return them if you get rid of the one card that can. And so you just pop that card first, and then they just kind of sputter out. So there are random matchups where this deck will just win off of the fact that it retires a board so frequently that your opponent just can't keep up.
Yeah, it has a little bit of that Gandiva, I'm retiring your board every single turn thing going.
Mm-hmm. It feels like they kind of took a lot of inspiration from Dragon Empire decks and went, okay, but what if it was Dark States?
What if instead of a dragon, it was a man in a suit with a lamp for a head?
With a jar head.
I will say, this deck really does feel appropriate, like you're casting a ritual to summon like an outer god or something.
Mm-hmm.
How the setup, the way that it incrementally increases until she breaks through the glass.
Yep. And it's very funny that they do it by making sweets. Because you can see, you have chefs in here, and even in Saccharine Bait, you can see the desserts that they're making are actually being cooked into the ritual fluid.
Yeah, I
Thematically, it's an incredible deck. Art-wise, it's an incredible deck. Gameplay-wise, if you win a game with this at your locals, that is a good day.
yeah. But it does seem like kind of fun to play, though. Actually.
It is an incredibly like it's the lines are incredibly easy to learn. The combo is incredibly simple. The only thing that gets super complex is the order itself. So this deck is super simple to play. It's super fun to just kind of meme around with. And without a doubt, there will always be at least one game where you play your order or you explain what your cards do and your opponent goes, I'm sorry, what?
Yeah.
And that feeling is always so fun.
All right. Well, thank you for coming on and showing off this deck.
Absolutely.
I'm a huge fan seeing this at locals every week.
And again, it is easily, even with buying the Dark States good stuff, it's easily one of the cheapest decks to build. So you're paying $5 if you play Dark States already. You're paying $5 to just have a blast of a time.
So you playing this started as a bit of a meme.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% did not want to play this deck. I was forced cards upon me during a pre-release and being like, all right, I have like half the deck at this point just from people handing me things because I play a lot of other Dark States decks and no one wanted this deck. So I just got kind of handed it as scraps. And I'm like, all right. And I ended up playing the Silver Rare Sacrifice class in my pre-release packs. And I'm like, all right, I guess I'm building the deck. And it's literally become one of, if not my favorite decks to play.
Austin just never stops playing this deck at locals.
I literally will play this every single week at locals, and everyone's like, "Are you playing Sacrifice Class again?" And I'm like, "Yes." What's the problem here?
Oh, this deck, like, this is the kind of deck that I love in Vanguard, where it's just doing something super goofy.
Don't max rarity this deck, kids. You will lose all forms of this being a budget deck.
The SEC is one of the cheaper SECs, though, right?
In terms of SECs, it's absolutely one of the cheaper ones. It comes in at just under $100 for the SEC. The frame rare Grand Dogmas will run you about 30 to 40 a piece. All the other Sack Glass stuff, max rarity comes in at like $5.
Yeah.
So in terms of max rarity, it's also one of the cheaper max rarity, but it definitely is not as cheap as just building this tech base rarity.
Yeah.
Nothing could beat this deck at base rarity.
Also, if you're gonna max rarity a deck, it should probably be one that's a little better.
One that you're actually going to win with, yeah.
But thanks for coming on. I hope everyone is as entertained by this deck as I am.
It's a goofy deck. It's so fun. Proxy it. If you don't want to buy the Dark States good stuff, but you want to try this deck out, proxy it. You'll find yourself having a blast with it.
Yeah, I can confirm. Like, everyone is delighted to see this whenever it gets whipped out.
Yeah, no one gets mad at you playing Sacrifice Class. It's always fun. It's always a laugh.
Yeah. I think I had to tell your opponent once, like, I'm sorry for praying for your demise, but I want Sacrifice Class to win.
And the opponent was like, "Yeah, no, that's valid."
Yeah. All right. Thanks again for coming on. Maybe we'll have you on again some other time if you have other decks you want to show.
Yeah, I've quickly picked up the fact that bad decks are fun, so I got a slew of them ready to go.
All right. Thanks, everyone. I'll see you next time.